I'm about to touch you. So, Hank Rain made a video very recently talking about the difference between drugs and gambling. I think it was specifically weed versus gambling, and how, in his opinion, um, weed is less worse than gambling. And I think it's a very interesting conversation. Obviously, he had a lot of input from Twitter and shit like that, but I just kind of wanted to go on my own input on that. I don't know why. I just don't have any fucking content, and this is the first ever thing I'm posting on this channel, so shut the fuck up. Shut up. Piss off. You know? But I think having a conversation like that it's such a vast question, right? Because it all depends, number one, on your personal opinion, right? For me, my personal opinion is that I feel like weed doesn't really have that much effect on you as a person at all. I don't even think people should be considering it to be harmful in its own aspect, right? Because the big problem with weed is that there's a lot of stipulation around it. A lot of people are like, oh, I would never do that. I would never do that. Because it's we grew up with this being considered such a bad thing. Even now, I know people that are yeah, I would never touch the stuff, I would never get anywhere near it, blah blah blah, and there's some understanding to that, because if you have a an addiction, an addictive personality, right? I feel like that makes sense why you try to stay away from everything. A big thing is some people just think everything is wrong, which is another argument in of itself. But I just feel like because of that, it gets a big negative rap for people who actually do use it. Those people are treated differently because they have access to this thing, and because they use it, other people are like, "Oh gosh, you're crazy. You're a stoner, you're a hippie, kind of thing." This big problem around it, and I just am like, "Okay, you're blowing it way out of proportion. You're kind of very much so being you need to not do this ever." And it's okay, but alcohol exists, I've seen you drink before. Don't get angry at me because I want to smoke, and you go around here destroying your liver doing something that actually does have addiction tendencies to it. And I feel like that's also the biggest thing that um you know it separates it from everything else. It's not an addictive substance. And what I mean by that is that it does not make you go through withdrawals. Now, obviously, anything that you abuse is an addiction. I'm not saying that. I feel like for me, a big thing is food. Food is my addiction. I use that a lot. But it's not like I'm doing freaking meth. You know what I'm saying? I feel like every time I've ever talked to anybody, they turn it up to such a degree. And I'm like, are you even kidding me right now? Have you ever understood anything? You know what I'm saying? I feel like, people will say this to me, and then, like I said, we'll go out and drink every day. We'll go out and do these things that are obviously very harmful and are addictive. So why are you getting so angry at me for, doing weed? But anyway, that's kind of my talk on weed specifically. Going back to kind of the whole argument as a whole, is weed worse than gambling, right? And I've made my argument for weed just being a normal substance similar to caffeine. It just makes you inebriated. Boom, there we go. That's the word. Got it. But back to that point, because of those things, I think that gambling is way worse. And way worse being an understatement. I think gambling is something that never has any positive output ever. Like the problem with it is that the entire industry, the entire gambling industry is literally made up of people being like, you need to put in money. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if it was that easy, if you could gain money from it, if you could actually do the things that you like want to do, oh, I'm gonna make thousands from it. Don't you think that there would be thousands of people doing it? Like that's the biggest thing that I have a problem. That's another problem with like people being so naive to be like, oh, this is a quick get rich scheme. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, this is the way I'm gonna gain all my money, and it's like, no. If it really was, you would be seeing Joe freaking Schmo across the street, driving up in his BMW, being like, "Oh, this is it." No, like you don't see that. I mean, to be fair, there's a lot of um problems with like people like boasting about it online and being like, "Oh, if you join my class," you know what I'm saying? Those people trick people. You know what I'm saying? I'm talking about the common people. You and I. If I was getting rich off a quick like get rich scheme, don't you think I wouldn't be making you pay to like learn about it? You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, if I'm making 20 grand a month, why does why does caring about your 50 bucks matter? You know, like that's a big thing as well. But that's I'm getting off track here. Gambling, right? The problem with that is that exactly what I said. There's no positive output, right? If there was a positive output, like I said, you would notice it. People would be talking about it. There would be more to it. Now there's like counting cards, but that's we're not talking about that. We're talking about true gambling, like actual doing stuff because you can't actually count cards with enough effectiveness to which a casino would be like, oh yeah, we're gonna let you do. No, they would tap you off the tables. They would be like, no, you're winning too much. Get out of here. Right? That's how they work. So that's where we're at so far. Is that like the negative? Gambling is negative, right? No matter what, it's not positive. It's a corrupt scheme to get people to spend money. And another thing is a lot of apps, a lot of things um, will use algorithms to get you to go into it again. There's a wonderful Drew Gooden video um, where he talks about like sports betting, right? That all the time, like it will track when you use the app and it will send you notifications during those times to be like, hey, spend a little bit of money. Look at this. Look at this little time where you can spend like a little bit of money and get a huge payout, type thing, right? And so like that's also another thing. It's a very corrupt and cryptic thing, right? So obviously now we've kind of got it, right? Weed is not bad at all if used responsibly, and gambling sits up closer to something like hardcore drugs because of how addicting it is, how much it ruins your life, how much it does everything. Now, like I said, weed does obviously not used correctly could be bad. It could be very um it could be very deteriorating. It can lead to lack of motivation. It could lead to anything. And so that's what you need to be careful by. Um but anyway, that's just kind of like my stance on it. Obviously, I feel like that's the majority of people's stances. I mean, I watched the video of what's it called Hank Green, right? Yeah, Hank Green. Um, and this is kind of like the main consensus is like people see gambling as more harmful. And there was actually a big thing. He did like a whole um Google form, and like the majority of people said that gambling was harmful, even though weed and gambling was a 50-50. Like, what do you use more, gambling or weed, right? It was a 50-50, and then it was like, what's more harmful? Gambling was like at a 90 percentile or something like that, which is super interesting to me that, like, if you know something's harmful, like, why do you do it? But then at the end of the day, isn't that what all addictions are? Like, you do these things because you're addicted to it. Um, and I think that's also just the big thing, too. With gambling, there's a lot of promise. You have so much promise of, like, hey, you could totally make millions of dollars. You could totally get that one scratch off ticket that'll make you enough, like a ton of money. You could totally get that one bet from a basketball game, and somehow it comes out and makes you $100,000. Um, and that's also a big dividing factor. Weed doesn't have anything to promise you, or at, this is what I mean. Weed is weed. You know what you're getting into. You're like, okay, I'm going to smoke this and I'm going to feel high and I'm going to be high for a few hours and then I'm going to be done, right? Somebody who uses it a lot obviously is going to have to use it a lot, and you get less effects based off of how much you use it. So that's like the big thing, is that gambling has a lot of promise that will not get fulfilled. Weed has not a lot of promise, but fulfills it exponentially, you know? And I mean, there's a lot of other arguments you can make for this. I suggest you go check out Hank Green's video on it. Hopefully, I'll put it in the comment section or some bullshit. I don't know. But I feel like it's a good video to talk about, and just explore gambling as a whole. There's a lot of videos on, like, gambling ruining people's lives, and I think those videos are really just interesting to watch. It makes it feel, like there's just a lot to it. But anyway, yeah, that's it. Peace.